I'm so happy to introduce my guest today. His name is Isaac Freebairn, and the reason I know Isaac goes back to long before I ever thought I would need to know someone like him in a professional way. So Isaac works at the Pine Cemetery. He
Yeah,
works for what's the name of the
it's
group?
Fairmount Memorial Association. Yeah, it's a nonprofit that owns the cemeteries here in Spokane.
Right, right. And the the reason that I ever met you was that my husband Steve and I had gone to Tennessee, Kentucky, that area where his dad was from, to just see his roots. And we took our daughter Hannah with us. She was
Mhm.
like a senior in high school at the time, and we went with a niece and nephew. Anyway, while we were back there, I was really struck by how many family cemeteries there were
Yeah,
in that part of the country. And we really don't do that here in the Spokane area where we live. Don't really see, you might see a little section, but you don't really see whole cemeteries dedicated to one family. And we really um, we really liked that. You know, we'd been doing some family history and tracing genealogy, and so seeing these, Flowers Cemetery, Stockton Cemetery, Crockett Cemetery, Craig Cemetery,
yeah.
it just really impressed us. So when we came back, we said, let's kind of buy up a little section of a cemetery and have these plots and make it the Craig,
The
section of a
Craig
cemetery.
Family Cemetery.
The
Yes,
Craig
yes, I
Family
remember.
Cemetery. So
Yes.
that's how I met you, and that decision then, a few years later on, ended up being super helpful. Actually, when Steve passed away, and I knew who I was supposed to call for that. That was
I
that was
remember the
something I
phone
hadn't
call.
anticipated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having a relationship with somebody ahead of time is helpful. And actually, when you made the call, I figured you were calling to do a little collaboration because you were thinking about what you wanted to do for a monument. And there'd been some discussion about that, but, at first you guys had just kind of purchased the property and we're going to let that percolate for a while. And that's what I figured you were calling for. And so then when you said, Isaac, I need your service, it was shocking. But of course, I was happy to help. And there's quite a story there that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Well, let's segue then into a little bit about you, about your background,
Yeah.
and how you ended up in the cemetery business.
Well, so I'm married and I have five kids, and a son-in-law and two grandkids. And I've lived in
Oh,
Spokane for, I guess we're getting close to 13 years. I was actually born in Costa Rica, and I've lived in lots and lots of places in my childhood. My family moved a lot. Um, how I got into this business is actually, it's a really interesting story because I'm sure that there was some divine intervention there. My career has always been some type of sales. I kind of have the personality for it and being able to talk to people. But I would get disaffected, after a few years of selling a product or service, or, it just didn't seem to matter. And I wanted to do something that mattered.
mhm.
So I'm going to get emotional. I'm sorry. um, so I had been laid off from a job, and I was really just kind of tired of taking a job because I needed a job, and I went to WorkSource, which is unemployment office. That's what it's called in other places. And I took an aptitude test, one of those questionnaire things that asks you all the weird questions, word association,
Uh-huh.
and that sort of thing. And then it's supposed to spit out, here's your list of jobs and career paths and, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and this is going to sound crazy, and I've like 95% sure this has never happened to anybody else because it's so weird. But um, the top three jobs were funeral home uh, manager, funeral director was number two. And then the third one, I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically what I do at a cemetery. It mentioned something about a cemetery.
Wow.
And that was the only three. Um, and I thought, well, that's weird. It was not on my radar. I'd had death in the family up to that point, but it was not something I'd ever considered because all I knew about, the funeral business was, you know, the caretaker, the embalmer, kind of those weird
Right,
ideas we have
right.
about funerals.
That cartoonish idea of the
Yeah.
hunched over guy
Yep.
in the hearse.
Yep, exactly. I hadn't even really been to cemeteries much in my life at that point, and so I told my wife about it. She goes, "Oh yeah, I could totally see you doing that," which was the second surprise. uh, so I just decided to explore it, and there was a position open at Fairmount for sales management, actually, because we have to have a manager for that. Um, but unbeknownst to me at the time, that was already being filled by an internal position, but they have to put it out there. And
Mhm.
so the CEO asked me, when they broke that news to me, would you consider doing, a sales position? There's an opening at Pines because someone's being promoted. And I said, yeah, I'd consider it, but I'd like to job shadow. Maybe
Mm,
sit in with somebody, and because I had some real questions. The main one was
mhm.
emotion. I'm an emotional
Right.
person, and being in that kind of environment, I wasn't sure if that was something I could do. Um, and sure enough, I met with the lady that was to be my boss, and she was handling a case that day. And I just sat there and listened, and it was a widow, little old lady, reminded me of my grandma. She was like
Mhm.
5 feet two and had just lost her
Mm.
husband. And after going through that event, I was like, yeah, I can totally do this. This is what I need to do. And that was a little over 7 years ago. So I just hit my 7 year anniversary. So,
That's that's amazing to me because when I think of when we went to your office, you must not have been at that job for very long.
no, I think maybe a year or two. I'm kind of fuzzy on timelines, but I think that sounds
Yeah.
about right. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And what I remember is I think we laughed a little bit, you
Yeah.
know, because we came in just, planning for the future, being super responsible and
Yep.
um so it wasn't an emotionally charged meeting and yet yeah, you were pleasant and easy to work with and uh wow, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And I, I don't know how many other people have taken that aptitude test and had those three jobs suggested. I'm not sure what it says about me, but it's just interesting. I think it's a blessing. It's changed my life in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
And I'd like to explore that. I'd like you to share more of that as we work through some of your experiences. Let's come back around to
Yeah.
how your personal experiences with grief um, have been have influenced your job experience or how your training has affected things.
It's kind of, well, I'll tell you about the first 3 months of my job a little bit, and then what
Mhm.
I share after will probably make sense. I'd been in the job for about 3 months, and there's a lot to learn, and it is an emotionally charged environment. And my boss had told me that when I started, and had given me some suggestions that I had forgotten. Um, and one day, my administrative assistant had come into my office, and it had been a stressful day. I'd dealt with several cases, and he was talking to me, and he was asking me some questions about a particular service that was coming up, and I didn't understand what he was saying. But yeah, I was just kind of, that brain fog that people experience when they experience a death. It's
Mhm.
kind of like that. And I was like, I don't even know what you're asking me about right now. And I started to panic a little bit because that didn't make sense to me. Like, he's speaking English. I can understand what he's
Right.
saying.
And he's talking
Um,
about a funeral service
yeah,
coming up, right?
yep,
Okay.
yep. And so I said, I've got to take a break. And, I kind of answered this question eventually, and I left for the day because we have a couple people that can handle things. And I called my boss and I told her what happened. And she goes, "Oh, yeah, I was wondering when this was going to happen to you." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she said, just kind of what I said. It's an emotionally charged environment. She said, you have to take care of yourself. So you have to go
Mm,
for walks in the cemetery. If you have something to do in the cemetery, walk there, don't drive.
mm,
She prays. You have to do things to kind of shield yourself a little bit and also take care of yourself. And she said, it's totally normal what you're experiencing. And she was very understanding. So now fast forward, when I lost my mother 2 years ago, or my grandmother 4 years ago, I was very experienced in my career at the time, and the family did rely on me, especially for my grandmother, to make some of the arrangements. And I thought, well, I know what to do. This is going to be simple.
mm,
I know
right.
all the moving parts. I know the steps. And what was surprising to me was the brain fog. So even though, yes, I'm a professional and I handle, maybe 120 cases a year, where someone has died, um, it was my brain was gone. I couldn't think.
Right.
Emotions were very much at the surface. Um, so even doing this as a professional, it did not shield me from those experiences. I did recognize them for what they were, but I was not shielded from that. So I don't know if that
Right.
answers your question, but
Well, that that it brings up another question. Can you share a little bit? You mentioned your mother and your grandmother. Can you talk about the people that you have been close to who have passed away and what your experience with grief has been?
yeah. So the most recent was my mom. And she lived in Utah, and she actually got a septic infection after dealing with radiation treatments for
Mm,
uterine cancer.
oh
Um,
my goodness.
it was quite a surprise. She finished her cancer treatments months and months before, and
Mm,
was having pain, and they figured it was physical therapy that she needed, because she'd been kind of laid up and she had some leg pain and some hip pain and things like that. And so she was actually staying at a facility to kind of help with that, do some physical therapy. And then all of a sudden she just got this massive fever and was not responding well. And so I got a call from my aunt, and my aunt said, "I think you need to come. She's on her way to the hospital." And I'm like, okay, so
yeah.
I left work, and I was standing in the Spokane airport when the doctor was able to call me from the emergency and just explained what was happening, and that yes, they could do surgery, but if she survives until the point of surgery, and then she may not survive the surgery, and if she did, her quality of life would be, because the infection was just so widespread.
It was
And
just
she was,
attacking her.
yeah, it was toxic. And so I'm standing in the airport, and you know how those you see those people, they're standing in the airport and they're talking on their phone, and it's kind of
Yeah.
annoying. So
Yeah.
I was thinking back on that, and I'm like, I wonder if anyone heard what I was saying. Um, but basically, they were asking me, what do I want to have done? Do they want me to intervene? Do they want me to try to keep her alive? All of those things. And I said, well, what would you do if it was your mom? And the doctor said I wouldn't intervene. Um, and I said, then that's what I'm going to do. I already knew from conversations with my mom, which I want to emphasize are probably really important to have.
Mm-hmm.
I knew from conversations over the years that my mom would not have wanted that kind of intervention. And so, I said that, and I didn't realize what I was saying, that they were going to keep, I just said, try to keep her there until I can get there. And that meant, they hooked her up to all kinds of stuff, and which I did not expect to see. My mom probably would not have been happy with me about that, but she was still there when I got there to the hospital, and she passed within about an hour of my arrival. Um,
Oh,
it was not what you see in movies. There wasn't the tender moment and the weird. It was just kind of, she was already kind of gone. Um, and I didn't get very emotional about it at the time. And I want to talk about this too, that there's different phases of grief and dealing with some of these challenges. But my mind kind of went into practical mode. So
yeah.
what's next? What do I need to do? My aunt was there. One of my sons was there, and we just started talking about what are the plans, and that kind of thing. And it wasn't until my wife arrived the next day, or maybe the day after, that I cried for the first time. So,
Right, right,
which is part of the deal. That's what you need to do. So,
right.
yeah,
That makes a lot of sense to me that you got this phone call and immediately responded to it. You're in the mode of trying to go take care of it, and then,
yeah,
and I appreciate. I'm grateful that you said it's not like in the movies, because I think that's something that we, before we've gone through any kind of experience with someone's death, whether it's a sudden accident or it's a lingering thing, it's never like that picture you have. uh, I don't know, maybe for some people it is,
yeah. And they're
a
lucky if
really,
it is. Yeah, the squeezing of the
yeah,
hand to let you know they can hear you, or the brief opening of the eyes, and they tell you they love you. Just all the stuff you see in movies.
right.
That's
And if you
not
don't
typical.
have that, if you
Yeah,
don't have that and you expect that it's supposed to be like that, you can kind of feel, I don't know, maybe cheated out of an experience, or even like maybe your faith wasn't strong. If she had known I was there, the love would have been so overwhelming that she would have had this flicker of
yeah,
recognition. Maybe
yeah.
it's important for people to know that that's not an indicator of the strength of the relationship.
Not at all. And I can contrast that with when my grandpa passed years ago. He passed, and I wasn't there. He had a heart attack in the middle of the night. Um,
Mm.
However, like 3 days before he died, I had had a very, very long conversation with him on the phone. And for my grandpa, that was really unusual. He was a beautiful man, like loved him dearly. Um, Kind of that World War II generation, practical.
Yeah.
He was an educator,
Hmm.
just very kind man. He'd been a bishop. Um, but he didn't talk on the phone. Back in
Right.
those days, you talked long distance. There was money
Right. It was
involved.
expensive. Right.
Yes, and
Right.
I was in Washington and he was in California, and so conversations with Grandpa was like maybe a minute or two, and then he's passing you to Grandma. And we talked on the phone for like 35 or 40 minutes. And just had a very pleasant
Wow.
conversation. And then, a few days later, he passed away. And when he passed away, I just thought back to that phone call. And I thought, well, I got
Yeah.
to have that awesome conversation with Grandpa. Um, and I think that's a good reminder about life. You don't know. Um, Death is universal, but you have no idea in what manner or in what time or where, when, how that's going to happen. So, uh, life is about your relationships and the people that you're involved with. So you should take that as much as you can. You know,
I 100% agree. And um, yeah, that concept right there, I think we could just underscore what you just said. Life is about relationships.
yeah,
It's about the relationship while we're still alive, and having the understanding that life is precious and that there's no guarantee can really affect our understanding of how important that day-to-day relationship is, because everyone has tiffs, everyone has conflicts, times they don't understand each other, times they fail to appreciate each other. But if the general substance of the relationship is good and positive,
Yeah.
then I think that goes a long way for, for example, that moment when you're trying to get to your mother's bedside. If your whole relationship hinges on whether you showed up on time,
Yeah.
that's such a fragile relationship then, right?
Yeah, it is. The relationships that you have going all the way back to the time you're in the womb are imprinted on you. You are shaped by your experiences and the interactions you have with, first your family and as an infant, and then all the way up through making choices as an adult with who you associate with. And those things are imprinted on you. And those things stay with you. And so that's what you have, whether you were there when that person passed away or not, you still have all of that shared experience. And part of who that person was is with you because of the way that they influenced you and shaped who you are as a person. And so, the cliche is they'll always be with you, right? And, our faith tells us that that's probably true, that they probably hang out with us from time to time and even administer to us and help us. But more importantly, I think, is just who they made us as a person, friend, relative, parent, child, whatever the relationship, they've had an impact on you, and that stays with you. So,
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. So you were contrasting that experience with your grandfather that was many years ago to the experience with your mother just recently.
mhm.
How have you noticed your grief journey in that time period? What is the same? What's changed?
um, I don't spend a lot of time grieving the dead. I never have. That's not to say I don't experience grief. What I'm saying, I guess, is that I don't feel bad for the dead because I think they're doing just fine. I I do experience longing, and when I experience that is when things remind me of them.
Mm.
When I hear Christopher Cross, on the singer singing "Sailing," I think of my dad because my dad lived on a sailboat and called himself a pirate. When
Wow.
I do yard work and trim trees or bushes, I think of my grandfather who taught me how to do that.
Mm.
And so when I think of that, I remember Grandpa with his gesturing with little scissor fingers to show me where to cut a particular branch. And then after I've shaped a bush in the way that it should go, I think back of my grandpa and I'm like, he was just such a patient teacher and such an inspiration. And now I'm a grandpa. And, those are the things that I think about. I don't spend a lot of time being sad for for them. I miss them,
Hmm.
but I don't feel sad for them, and that's because of my faith. I think, just I think they're doing fine. So,
Was it easy for you to come by that kind of faith, or was it something you had to work for?
oh no, I was not raised in a good environment. My parents managed a bar in Wyoming, in this little town. If it weren't for the influence of my grandparents that I lived with as a teenager, I'd be a very different person.
Mm.
And I would not say it was easy to come by. I definitely have a powerful testimony of the Savior, and that's kind of what I rest everything on. I mentioned our faith, and it does inform us, and does a pretty good job, I think, of talking about what happens after death and all of that. But and a lot of faiths share agreement in some of that. but I don't think it's everything. We don't know everything, but what we do have is trust and faith, and I trust that the plan that God has, because this is only a small part of it, this life, is good. I think whatever is going to happen after this life, in all of its details, is good. So
Right.
I'm happy with that. I'm okay with that. So
Right. Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know about your growing up in
colorful.
yeah,
Yeah.
Wyoming. Yeah, and I imagine that you would have seen a lot of heartache, people with
Yes.
hard things that they were trying to maybe escape from.
It was not a protected environment to grow up in. That's for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so this development of faith, then do you feel like it was partly a response?
Yeah, I definitely wanted something different. I wanted a different marriage than that of my parents. I wanted a different family life. Um, and, the gospel was that vehicle
Mm-hmm.
that I responded to. I had friends in school. It was actually a Mormon community, like a Star Valley, Wyoming. I don't, it's
Oh
in the,
yeah.
it's south of Jackson Hole. It's beautiful mountain, town series of towns. Uh, Lots of LDS people, and yeah, it was, and my family was the one that managed one of the two bars in town. So it
Right,
was kind of
right.
weird. But I had some friends in school, and they would invite me to church once in a while, and I would sit with their family. And I was baptized when I was 12. My
Wow.
grandpa baptized me in a river in Wyoming. And then later, of course, I lived with my grandparents in California when my parents divorced. That's where I started high school, and so I had the seminary experience, early morning and
Mm-hmm.
church and mission and all of that stuff. And so, yeah,
Wow. Wow. And such a different trajectory that
yeah, for sure.
that your life went on, and now here you are, father, 5 children, grandfather,
Yep.
helping people when they are at their most confused, brain fog,
Hmm.
vulnerable time.
Yeah, there's a trust there that has to be there, and I get to go home every day, just feeling good. Even though I deal with sad experiences and things, part of that is, I guess, the perspective I have about death, but I just know
Mm-hmm.
that I helped people. There's a time frame and uh, a long list of events and tasks that people have to do. Think of it like a yardstick. Someone dies,
Yes.
and they have a bunch of stuff to do, not just related to the death and the funeral and all that, but now, oh, we have to sell mom's house, or we have to figure out how to do the bills, or just all the stuff. Um, I just have a very small piece of that timeline to help people, just with kind of that component. And I recognize they have a lot of other things. And I'll often tell people that you still have all these other things, but just do them one at a time. I'll help you with this. Don't worry.
Right.
The tent will be set up. We'll be ready for your family to arrive. All that kind of stuff. And you can just kind of see the relief, and the burden is gone from. That's one less thing they have to worry about. So.
I'm glad you brought that up. That is 100% true. I can remember right after Steve passed away, I was really fortunate that uh, my one of my brothers and Steve's brother had already been planning to come up that next day to visit,
Hmm.
and so he, that, and one of my brothers was able to just, the moment he got the call, he got in a car and was, drove 7 hours to my house to be there to support me. And so I was really fortunate to be immediately surrounded by people who were able to go into that mode of, making lists, checking them
Yes.
off, doing details, which you don't always think about. Uh, certainly ahead of time, you don't have any idea just how many task lists there are involving someone's passing, like you were saying. And something that I remember mentioning more than once to banks or businesses was, any time you ask me to do more than one task, or any time that you complicate a task, you actually are adding to my burden and grief in a moment when there's very little there. Like, for example, I knew I needed to call the bank and say my husband passed away. What I didn't know was that there's a one primary, even though we had a joint account, he
Yes.
was the primary on the account. So the
Yep.
moment I called the bank, they closed my account. I mean, they
Yep.
didn't. I mean, they. I couldn't access that account because he had been the primary holder of the account, and I thought
Yep.
I
I hear
wouldn't
this
have
all the
told
time.
you,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yep.
So maybe you could take a minute and go down uh, some of these things, like that, just for people to be aware of.
Yeah.
Um,
So first, I'm going to share an analogy that I think is important.
okay.
In life, you hear about you're walking on a road, right? And sometimes there's obstacles in the road, and say a big boulder, for example. And you have to figure out, how do I move that boulder, and how do I get over that boulder, or get under that boulder, or go around the boulder. But life, I have found, is very seldom blocked by boulders.
Mm,
It's actually blocked by a very large pile of very small rocks. What do I mean by that? Basically, that usually big trials and big difficulties are tasks. It can be broken up into tasks. And death is the same way. I mentioned that yardstick. There's a ton of stuff to do, but it's not one big thing. It's a whole bunch of little things. And most people can pick up a little rock. And if you're overwhelmed, which you definitely are when you
mm,
have a death, you just have to go, okay, what's the next rock? And it's still hard. Picking up rocks is hard. Like, you bend over and your back hurts, and but your capacity to pick up rocks increases. And each time you accomplish that little thing, you feel a little bit better, and that pile gets smaller, until eventually you can step over it and keep going. Um, that's true of life in general, but I think that analogy applies really well to this scenario that we're talking about, because there are a bunch of things. So some of those things, or I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, but that's
I love what you said. Uh, Immediately I thought about how I think if I had thought of it from that perspective, I probably would have spaced some things out and
yeah,
not felt like all these things had to be done in a week or
yep,
right now, right? Even like one particular thing that I'm sure you would have brought up, even with the bank accounts. Yes, you have to inform the bank that someone has passed away,
yep,
but it doesn't have to be 2 minutes after they died.
that's right.
And one of the things I needed to know was, what the value of our account was the day that he passed away. But
Hmm.
you know what? The bank has a computer system. They can go back and they can find that out,
Yeah,
even if it's, down the road. So, I mean, we had a
and
CD that I didn't even know about, got a little reminder in the mail. Oh, your CD's coming due, like 2 years after Steve passed away.
yeah,
And that was not a big deal. Called the bank. My husband passed away. Sent the paperwork. But if I had felt panic about that a week or a month after he passed away, that would have been a much bigger task. So I like the idea that you're saying about the small rocks. I'm going to
when
take that with
it's
me.
the other piece of that is that you don't have to do it all at once. Um, I mean, you said that, but I met with a guy last week. him and his girlfriend had been taking care of his dad for a couple of years, in his home. And he was talking about that, and his dad had passed away. And he says, I have so much to do. I have, we have to, dad was a big smoker. And so we have to tear out everything in the house and get it ready to sell. And I, 2 years ago, I bought this fifth wheel and I haven't been able to use it because there's just so much to do. And here we are in the middle of the summer and I have these e-bikes and I would like to just go. And I said, well, I actually said, dude, dude, you do not have to do something big, because you do have a lot to do, but you got to take care of yourself and, go for a ride. Like you don't have to
Yeah.
go on a big glamping camping trip for a week and be away from all these things you have to do, but certainly you can go for a walk with your girlfriend at the river. You
Yes.
can step outside and sit in the grass, recharge. That you have to do that when you have all this stuff to do. It's kind of like your first podcast. Actually, you had a friend that said, "Julie, let's go for a walk."
Yes.
That was good, right?
Yes. It was. Yes,
You met that
exactly.
beautiful person, and but also just the act of going for a walk and kind of getting away from all that stuff is not a bad thing to do. It's necessary to do.
Right.
It's important
Right.
to do. It's worthy to do. Like you're not taking away from anything by doing it. You're not dishonoring the person because you're not grieving enough because you're taking care of yourself. Um,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Those small boulders, those small rocks will be there.
yeah,
And, yeah. And that boulder in the highway isn't keeping you from experiencing some life, some happiness, you know, some living.
I think if you don't let yourself experience life and go on living, then you're dishonoring the person. You're not honoring them. And remember, we talked about that imprint that they left on you. That's meant to be passed on. That's meant to be developed even further. It shaped who
Right.
you are as a person. And now you're supposed to go and be a person and continue that
Right.
ripple and imprint others. That's how you honor the people that have passed before you, not by
Right.
paralyzing. No, keep in mind, I'm
Right.
not. There is a stage where you are paralyzed. I'm not saying you
Right.
shouldn't have that, but
Right.
that
That's
should be a
natural. That's
stage. Yes,
normal. Right.
yes, that should be a
Right. But then,
phase that, and then you work into living life, and
well,
you need to do that.
people like you in your line of work can do a lot to help somebody uh, when they are feeling paralyzed. So,
Yeah.
so share, share a little bit um, about what happens when somebody comes in to see you. Let's assume it's not like me where we went ahead of time and said, let's let's find some plots at the
Yeah.
cemetery. What happens when somebody comes in to see you and their loved one has just recently passed away?
Well, so at the cemetery, we are not the funeral home. So, usually a funeral home has been contacted, or if it hasn't, I will suggest that, because the funeral home is who is going to take care of a person's body when they pass away. And that's whether they're going to be cremated or whether they're going to be placed in a casket. The funeral home that's kind of their role. The funeral home will, file with the county to get a death certificate. They do certain things that have to be done before a burial can happen or a cremation can happen. And so that's kind of step one, making sure that that's in place. And then after that, it's just kind of meeting with the family and asking, what is it that you guys would like to do? And sometimes people know, and sometimes they don't. If there's been conversations that they've had with their loved ones, then they have hopefully a good picture, that we want to do traditional burial. We want to have a casket, or no, we want to do cremation and we want to bury that urn in a loved one's plot, or we want to have that urn in a niche, like in a wall. There's lots of different ways to do things, and it's not my job to push people in one direction or another. It's to kind of ask them the right questions so that they can kind of say at least the things they do know they want to do, and then I can make some suggestions. And somewhere along the way, a solution will speak to them. Whether it's a location or, what the particular method is or the service, details will start kind of speaking to them. Yeah, that's what mom would want, or yeah, that's what we talked about, or that sounds nice. Those things come back. And so then it's just a matter of making the arrangements. That can be a lengthy process. And so probably 60% of what I do is actually pre-planning. I'm a big advocate of pre-planning, in part because it's financially less of a burden to pre-plan, but mostly it's because of that brain fog that we've been talking about. It's so much easier on a family if the plan's already in place. They just walk in the door and they can make a few decisions that are still remaining. Maybe, what the headstone should look like, or how many chairs they want at the graveside, those kinds of questions. But the big questions are already decided, and it's such a relief for them. So I'm an advocate for that. And so you'd asked earlier about what are some of the practical suggestions. I would say people should have a will. I don't handle wills. I just hear nightmare stories all the time about probate and disputes between family members about division of assets. And, I'm not a counselor, but I often end up saying to people, this is not a time to resolve family disputes and to bring up old wounds. This is a time to have grace for each other.
Yes.
Emotions are high. You're at your limit. You're kind of right at the top. Like I'm putting my head right at my forehead right now. So your emotions are right there, and any little thing will make it go. Whether it's anger or crying or just anything, you're already at your limit. And so if people can arrange that kind of stuff beforehand, at least have conversations with their family members. It does not mean they need to use the arrangements anytime soon. I have never had anyone make arrangements in my office and then promptly drop dead in the parking lot when they leave.
Right. It's not a cause and effect.
Yes.
Planning ahead is not signing your death warrant.
It's just practical. I've even said to people that are Christian, even Jesus needed a tomb. He borrowed his for a few days, but he still needed one. So everybody is going to experience that. And whether it's super simple and they just cremate somebody and then they scatter them in the ocean like I did with my dad, or whether they want to have a family estate and have a place to visit, everybody's going to have those conversations. And so it's just so much easier to have it beforehand.
Yes. Well, and speaking of the family estate, that was an interesting, we had
evolution.
That was an yes, because when Steve and I first went to you, it was because we were really inspired by seeing the names of family members that we could trace on his genealogy, right? Mm-hmm. Seeing their names put together in a space that we could go and visit was really inspiring to us. It gave us a very deep sense of identity that, that we were a part of this family legacy. And that was what we originally had wanted to kind of recreate. But it's an interesting thing what happened in our case after Steve passed away. I was sitting in
and we'd even done drawings, remember?
That's right.
We had sketched out rudimentary Craig estate with an archway and a wall and trees and benches and
that's true. Yeah, we really had. This was we were people would be able to go into the cemetery and see the Craig name there, and our children and grandchildren would have a place to have that connection with we as their ancestors, right? And and or their predecessors. Anyway. But then an interesting thing happened. Steve had Steve passed away in May, and I think around December of that same year, I was sitting in church, and during the sacrament portion, the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, as some people in their faith call it. I was sitting in there, and in my mind, uh, just a picture came into my mind of a statue of Christ on a kind of a raised platform with these granite panels that had engraved in them the words to, um, uh,
A poor wayfaring man.
it's a hymn that we sing, "A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief." I can't remember the name of the original poem, but the first line is, "A poor wayfaring man of grief hath often crossed me on my way." And it's this beautiful hymn about this man who comes across, well, someone who comes across this man who needs water, is
Needs help. Yeah.
fatigued, is beaten and left for dead. All these parables of Christ, and then at the end, the man, his eyes are open, and he sees that this man he's been assisting is Christ, and Christ says,
Yes.
as you have done it to the least of these,
Yes.
I am the one you have been doing this for.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's the parable of the sheep and the goats, kind of. You. When I
yeah,
was hungry, you fed me. When I was sick, you visited me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was sick, you administered to me. Uh, yeah.
exactly,
Yep.
exactly, yeah. So this image in my mind came with a real sense that I needed to make this happen, and that was the actual um, monument that I should put at the gravesite, where Steve was buried.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve's buried with a very simple headstone. It's a
Yeah.
flat
The VA
military
marker.
headstone.
Yeah.
He was a major in the Air Force, and so it's beautifully simple. I love it, and but I did have this feeling like I needed to make this happen, which I had no idea how to do.
Yeah.
And and and
I had some idea, but not. I definitely didn't
right,
have all the pieces for sure.
right,
And I
and
remember when you called me, it was kind of, you said, "Hey, I'm ready to start working on this project again, but we're going to change gears, and I want to make this about the Savior, and I want it to
right,
be more about a place that people could come and see something about the Savior and be inspired by the Savior, and not so much about the Craig family estate." In fact, you have a dedication
exactly,
on the back of the monument, to your husband and to Stephen
right,
and to yourself, and just who made the monument, which is customary. But it's definitely about Jesus. it's not. It's
right,
not about the. So you'd had a shift. It was clear. Um,
right.
yeah.
Right. And that process of doing that is just, I mean, it was an amazing experience. And even the way it was funded was kind of incredible, because Steve he was a dermatologist. He did a lot of skin cancer surgery, and in his office, uh, there was a third floor that hadn't been really built out completely, and he and his partners had been
Yeah.
planning to build out a surgical um,
Yeah. I remember this.
suite
Yeah.
there, right? And so we had earmarked our portion of funds for that surgical suite. And then when he passed away, of course, I can't own his part of the practice. I'm not a physician.
Yeah.
And so our ties with the practice itself and the building and all of that were dissolved. And so this portion of funds that Steve and I had already earmarked towards that were sitting, without a purpose.
Yeah.
And it was incredible, because when it was all said and done, when that statue was completed and the granite was installed, it was almost to the penny like within dollars, the same amount. And I can remember writing, because I actually wrote physical checks. I remember writing those checks and putting it in the mail and just scratching my head saying, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I just wrote a check for that,
Yeah. Yeah.
And at that moment, I just completely perceived Steve's voice in my mind saying, who cares about dermatology anyway? This is the
Yeah.
legacy that
Yeah.
I would want to leave. He truly would have wanted people to know that above all things, he was a disciple of Christ,
Yeah.
and that he really, really believed in treating people the way Christ would treat people, especially in their most vulnerable moments.
Yeah, for sure.
And and so it honors him in the aspect that it represents his deepest and most cherished beliefs.
Well, and it's the perfect thing to have in a cemetery because it offers the hope of resurrection. So
Yes.
you come to the cemetery to feel some connection to your loved one, but that's not where they are. That's where their
Yeah.
remains are, and you do feel connected. My mom's at a cemetery in Utah, and when we go to visit Utah, we stop by to see our respective moms. My wife and I, and you
Yeah.
feel connection, but uh, it's important to feel connected to the Savior because otherwise all this is meaningless.
That's right.
Eventually those graves will be gone. Hundreds of years from now, however long it takes for everything to decay and whatever. But with Christ, we have hope of the resurrection. We have hope for being able to see our loved ones, not just feel connected in a cemetery. So
The
the statue
actual
is
opening of
awesome
the
for that.
graves.
Yeah, the actual opening of the grave, exactly, and reuniting of our body with our spirit and ascending into heaven and actually seeing our Savior. So that statue is a good reminder of that. Yeah, I think it was a good move, Julie.
Well, it, it took us, how long do you think it took us to go from sketches to actually installing?
Over a year, maybe even
Yeah.
close to two. It was quite a collaborative process. Your brother was amazing.
Yeah.
Y-
Yeah. My
your brother
brother's
is
just,
yeah,
yeah. He's a sculptor, artist.
uses AutoCAD like a genius. Yeah, we
Yeah.
did some Zoom
Yeah.
calls and had some sketches, and he just kind of zoomed it out. Just this is kind of what it looks
Exactly.
like, and then collaborating with the granite
Yeah.
company and of course the artist you found for the statue. It was all just fun. At least it was fun for me. It was long.
It
It took a long
was.
time, but it
Yeah.
was fun.
Well, and so now there's this beautiful statue of Christ in the cemetery, and um, I hope that other families are able to feel some peace and solace there.
Oh, I can tell you, I've already heard from lots of people about it. In fact, I heard from people last week about it, and I can tell that story if you want to hear it.
I
Um,
I would love to. I would
and
love to hear it.
so actually, it goes back a little further than that. Maybe 2 weeks ago, I had a family that came in, and their sister had passed, and I cannot remember the country they're from. They're from Africa, but I can't
Hmm.
I can't think of the country. Um, but if you can picture them, very very dark skin, broad white smiles, just beautiful
Mm,
people, and some
hmm.
traditional dress.
Hmm.
And a bunch of people came into my office. There was like 15 people, and they were
Wow, and that's a
siblings.
small
And
office.
yes, yes, yes. Um, and uh, and they were kind of in a caravan too, multiple vehicles. And they said they wanted to be down at
Wow.
South Pine Cemetery. So, we drove down there because I handled a couple of different cemeteries. My office is at one, and then the other one where the statue is doesn't have an office. So we went down there, kind of pulled over close to the entrance, and then I got out and I was just kind of explaining how the cemetery worked. And it's a pretty new cemetery as cemeteries go. So there's not a lot of ornamentation. There's not a lot of features. The trees are small. Um, another reason you wanted to put something there, Julie. um,
Yes, yes.
and they said, well, what's that over there? There's a statue. And I said, oh, well, I said, that's a statue of Jesus. Are you Christian? They said, yes, let's go there. And so they walked like from the gate all the way over to the statue, and it was super windy. And and they were like, yeah, we want to be really close to this. And the mom was
Oh,
sitting on the bench, and they were reading the hymn, and they picked a plot right behind it.
oh,
And the service was actually last week, and there were probably 300 people there for that
wow.
service. Like their whole community came. That cemetery road that goes around was completely full of cars, completely full of cars. People were sitting on the benches, you know.
Oh,
So it's going to be used for a lot of things like that, and I know that was your intent, and so I like telling you when something like that happens, because I know that
yeah.
was important to you. So I'll continue to do that, of course, let you know when stuff like that happens. But it was awesome to see it.
Wow. That makes me really happy.
Yeah.
So, so, well, how have you changed as a person through these experiences that you've had with grief and now working in in the cemetery arena?
Well, I mentioned at the beginning that I had done some jobs that had been frustrating because they lacked significance. And now I have a job that is very important to people. So honestly, a lot of your self-worth is tied up in what you do for a living. You spend 8 or 10 hours a day doing things, whatever you do, and how what you do affects how you feel about yourself. I feel really good about myself. Doesn't mean I'm
Yeah.
perfect or nothing like that. I'm not self-congratulating myself or anything. I just am very happy about what I do. I'm hoping that if all continues to go well, that I'll just retire from there. So that's another
Yeah.
15 or so. You're kind of stuck with me.
Yeah.
I'll be there for
well,
for a while. But
well, I hope you'll
yeah,
be long retired before my kids have to come in and say, "Remember that lady?" that
yeah, I know that it is kind of odd because it is a niche wall and it is intended for your uh, kids and their kids and their kids, and you and I will be long gone. You know, uh,
yeah.
when that continues to be used. So that's kind of cool to think about, that there is a legacy there that will
Yeah.
matter to people for a long time. So
Yeah. I appreciate that. I appreciate what you do, and I know that when Steve and I went in there the first time, we it was still a little theoretical, right?
yeah,
All we
hmm
knew was that we we were grateful that we had a place to go and honor those who'd gone before,
yeah,
and and metaphorically thank them for eventually providing life and
yeah,
experiences to us, to him in particular. um, and I was grateful for that process, but I was especially grateful when Steve passed away that I had that relationship with you already, and you really really guided me and my family through that process, because they were there with me
yeah,
helping. I'm 100% agree with you that doing a lot of these things ahead of time makes a big difference in the moment
yes,
when you need them. I was grateful that it was simply a phone call, and the funeral home that we worked with was amazing. They were they were so helpful. I know a lot of people, they worry about the cost. It is, it's expensive, and sometimes that can even, people can be a little jaded with that, and avoid working through or talking about things that have to do with somebody's passing. But you should at least look into it, right? At least look into
Yeah.
what the options are when somebody passes away, so that in that moment, that's not one of the burdens you're thinking about.
It's really important to do what's meaningful to you and your family. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, exploring that is the way to figure out what's
Right.
important. You know,
I know for some of my siblings, they actually took that realization that Steve had passed away and that there were all these things to do. I know some of them went and got their wills done
yeah,
and had those conversations. One of my brothers said, he said his wife was super mad at him and didn't want to have it, didn't want to talk about it. But it's a reality. Like you said, death is universal. Every one of us will experience our own at some point, and probably be involved in the death of someone close to us before. So
well, and usually
it's just
people
a normal
start
part of
thinking
life.
about, yeah, and they start thinking about their own arrangements. When they do, you lose a loved one, and in this line of work, um, it sounds really weird to say it this way, but I have more relationships and ongoing relationships with families and referrals and things like that than anything else I've done, which is weird because you would think,
Mm-hmm.
oh, someone passes away and that's it. You're going to be serving them for that. But then you end up serving their family and their friends, and it just kind of
Right.
continues. So it's very valuable for that. So
Right, right. Again, because any kindness and compassion that you can offer someone in their most vulnerable time is people take that to heart,
yeah,
forever. And it's an important reminder to anyone in any capacity, even the physician who called you from the ER. Hopefully, that was a really compassionate
very,
um,
yeah,
experience, right? Yeah,
yeah,
because you can forget when you're dealing with things every day that phone call for someone else is a once in a lifetime
yep,
phone call.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this. I really, really appreciated our conversation. And before we finish, I would
Yeah.
like to ask you the question I ask everyone, which is, what do you think it means to grieve well?
I think grieving well means to live well. And I don't know if anyone else has said that yet, but um, we've talked about it a little bit that it's important to continue to live your life and um, you're honoring the people that emotion you're honoring. So do that. Just do that with vigor, and don't hold yourself back because of uh, loyalty you might feel towards that loved one. They're going to be happy that you're happy and experiencing things and carrying on. Um, I'm sure of that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Julie. That was awesome.